Shadows of poverty. My struggle begins. I was born into poverty. For as long as I can remember, life was a constant struggle. My earliest memories are not of toys or laughter, but of my mother waking up before the sun, sweeping the mud floor of our small house and preparing a meal that often consisted of nothing more than bread and tea. My father worked endlessly, taking on any labor he could find, sometimes carrying bricks at construction sites, sometimes loading sacks at the market, but despite his efforts, the money was never enough. As a child, I didn't understand what it meant to be poor. To me, it was normal to wear clothes until they tore beyond repair, or to walk barefoot because shoes were a luxury we couldn't afford. I didn't realize until much later that the world outside my small village was very different, filled with people who had comforts I could only dream of. Every day felt like a test. Hunger was my closest companion. Some nights, I would lie awake staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the growl of my stomach. My mother would tell me stories to distract me from the emptiness, her voice soft and filled with love, but I could see the pain in her eyes. Parents have a way of hiding their suffering, but even as a child, I could feel it. School was my only escape. I loved learning, even though I often went without books or pencils. I remember borrowing torn notebooks from classmates, scribbling my lessons in the margins, trying to capture every word the teacher said. But even attending school wasn't easy. Sometimes my father would need me to work with him. On those days, I would skip class to earn a few extra coins. Carrying heavy loads that bent my small shoulders and left blisters on my hands, I envied the other children. I came to school with full bellies, neat uniforms, and polished shoes. I tried not to show it, but deep inside, I longed to live like them. I longed to eat until I was full, to play without worrying about tomorrow, to dream without the weight of survival pressing down on me. The worst part of poverty is not the hunger or the torn clothes, it's the feeling of invisibility. Society doesn't see you. People pass by as if you don't exist. I remember standing outside a bakery once, watching through the glass as families bought cakes and sweets. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, making my stomach twist with desire. When one of the shopkeepers saw me staring, he didn't smile or offer help. Instead, he scolded me for standing too close, as if my very presence was dirtying his shop. That humiliation burned deeper than hunger ever could. But even in those dark days, a small flame of determination burned inside me. I didn't know where it came from. Maybe from watching my parents sacrifice every ounce of energy to keep us alive. Maybe from the countless nights I whispered silent promises to myself that I would change my life, no matter what it took. I knew I couldn't accept this life as my destiny. Still, poverty is a cruel teacher. It doesn't just test your body, it tests your spirit. There were times when I almost gave up, when I thought, this is it. I'm meant to stay poor forever. But every time I hit that breaking point, I remembered my mother's eyes. They carried both pain and hope. I wanted to give her a better life. I wanted her to rest instead of waking up before dawn. I wanted my father to sit proudly instead of breaking his back for pennies. My story didn't begin with success or fortune. It began in the shadows, in a place where survival was the only goal. I was just a poor boy with nothing but hunger in my stomach and dreams in my heart. I didn't know it then, but those struggles were shaping me, preparing me for a journey that would change everything. And this was only the beginning. The day everything fell apart, life was already hard, but nothing could have prepared me for the day when everything collapsed. I was only 15 when it happened, yet the memory is carved so deeply into my mind that even now, years later, I can feel the same sharp sting in my heart. It was a hot afternoon. The kind of day when the sun feels like it's punishing you just for existing. My father had gone to work early in the morning at a construction site in the city. My mother had stayed back sewing clothes for neighbors in exchange for a little food. I was supposed to be in school, but I skipped class that day to help my father earn a few extra rupees. I thought I was doing the right thing. But fate had other plans. I remember the chaos. People running, voices shouting, dust filling the air. I had just reached the site when I saw men gathered around, their faces pale with fear. And then I saw my father lying on the ground, blood on his forehead, his body still. He had fallen from scaffolding while carrying a heavy load. My heart froze. I ran to him, calling out Baba, Baba, but he didn't answer. His rough, hard-working hands, the ones that had held me steady all my life, now lay limp in the dirt. That moment shattered me. My father wasn't just my parent, he was our strength, the pillar that held our fragile world together. Without him, everything collapsed. The days that followed were a blur of grief and struggle. We couldn't even afford a proper funeral. Relatives whispered about how unlucky we were. Neighbors offered a little help, but soon they moved on with their own lives. For them, it was just another tragedy in a poor family. For us, it was the end of everything we knew. My mother was devastated. I watched her cry silently at night, clutching my father's old shirt as if it could bring him back. But the world doesn't pause for grief. Bills had to be paid, food had to be found, and with my father gone, the responsibility fell on me. I was just a boy, but in one cruel moment, childhood was ripped away from me. I left school. I didn't want to, but what choice did I have? Dreams don't feed an empty stomach. I started working full-time, taking whatever job came my way. Some days it was lifting bricks, other days washing dishes in a small tea shop. My hands grew calloused, my body grew tired, but no matter how hard I worked, the money was never enough. There were nights when my mother and I would eat nothing, giving whatever little food we had to my younger sister. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why life had to be so cruel. Why did fate take my father? Why did poverty have to cling to us like a curse? But the worst pain wasn't hunger or exhaustion. It was the feeling of hopelessness. I began to believe that maybe this was my destiny, to live and die poor, just like so many others around me. That thought haunted me. Every time I saw my mother's tired face or my sister's thin frame, guilt crushed me. I wanted to give them a better life, but I felt powerless. Still somewhere deep inside, a stubborn fire refused to die out. Even in the darkest moments, a voice whispered, "This can't be the end. You're meant for something more." It was during those days of despair that something unexpected happened. Something small, but powerful enough to change the course of my life. A stranger's act of kindness would ignite a spark of hope that I thought I had lost forever. But before that spark came, I had to endure the storm the day when everything fell apart. A stranger's kindness that sparked hope after my father's death. I felt like I was drowning in darkness. Every day was the same wake-up before sunrise. Go to work, come back with aching muscles, and see my mother's weary face waiting at the door. We survived on the bare minimum. Dreams, they felt like a luxury meant for other people, not for someone like me. But one moment changed everything. I was working in a small roadside tea stall at that time. My job was simple: clean tables, wash dishes, and carry trays of tea to customers. The pay was nothing compared to the effort, but it was enough to keep a little food on our plates. I hated that job not because of the work itself, but because of the way people treated me. To most customers, I wasn't a human being. I was invisible, just another poor boy serving tea. One evening, a man in a neat suit walked into the stall. He looked different from our usual customers. His shoes shone, his shirt was crisp, and his eyes carried something I hadn't seen in a long time: kindness. He ordered a cup of tea and I hurried to serve him. As I placed the glass on the table, my hands trembled a little. He noticed. "Son," he said softly, "you look tired." "How old are you?" I hesitated. People rarely asked me questions like that. 16, I muttered. He looked at me for a long moment. 16, Don, already carrying the world on your shoulders. His words hit me harder than he could have known. I wanted to hold back my emotions, but something in his voice broke the dam inside me. For the first time in years, I told someone the truth. I told him about my father's death, my mother's struggles, and my dreams of studying that had been buried under the weight of survival. He listened. Really listened. That alone was more than what most people ever did. When I finished, expecting nothing more than polite silence, he smiled gently and said, "Life can be cruel, but it also gives second chances. Don't lose your hope." The next day he came back, and the day after that. Each time he spoke to me not as a servant but as a person. He told me about his own past, how he too had once been poor, working small jobs before someone gave him an opportunity. He said something I'll never forget. What keeps you poor is not just the lack of money the lack of belief that things can change. One evening as he was leaving, he pressed something into my hand. It was a book, old, worn out, but valuable to me in ways I can't describe. "Read this whenever you have time," he said. "It won't fill your stomach, but it will fill your mind. And a strong mind can change everything." That book became my treasure. It was about perseverance, hard work, and faith in oneself. I carried it everywhere, reading whenever I could, while waiting tables. During late nights, and even in the early mornings before heading to work, slowly, my perspective began to shift. For the first time since my father's death, I felt something inside me stir again hope. If that man could change his life, maybe I could too. His words reminded me that poverty wasn't the end of my story, just the beginning. Of course, reality didn't magically transform overnight. I was still poor, still working at the tea stall, still struggling to feed my family, but mentally, I was no longer defeated. I started to dream again. Not wild, impossible dreams, but small, steady goals. Save a little money, learn new skills, find better work. That stranger never gave me money. What he gave me was far more valuable belief. His kindness showed me that even in a world where most people overlook you, there are still those who see you, who remind you of your worth. And that spark, that tiny flicker of hope, became the fire that pushed me onto a path I never imagined possible. Because of him, I realized my life didn't have to end in poverty. It could change. I could change. And that realization was the beginning of everything. The road of hard work and sacrifice hope is powerful, but hope alone doesn't fill an empty stomach. After meeting that stranger and reading the book he gave me, something inside me had changed. I no longer wanted to just survive. I wanted to fight for a better life. But wanting something and achieving it are two very different things. The path ahead was filled with pain, sacrifice, and endless hard work. The first thing I did was save. Every single coin mattered. While other workers at the tea stall spent their wages on small pleasures like snacks, cigarettes, or a new shirt, I held on to every rupee I could. I told myself, if I can endure hunger, I can endure anything. My mother worried that I worked too much and ate too little, but I kept reminding her one day this will be worth it. At night, when everyone else slept, I stayed awake with the old book the stranger had given me. It taught me about self-discipline, persistence, and how knowledge could open doors that strength alone never could. That inspired me to borrow more books from an old library in town. The librarian looked at me strangely the first time, probably wondering why a poor boy in torn clothes wanted books, but he allowed me to sit in a corner and read. I studied math, business basics, and even simple English words. It wasn't easy, many times. The words felt like puzzles I couldn't solve. But I refused to give up. I told myself every new word I learn, every lesson I understand, is a brick in the foundation of my future. Of course, studying was only part of the battle. I still had to work long hours. I took on extra jobs. Cleaning at the market in the mornings, serving tea during the day, and helping load trucks at night. My hands blistered, my body ached, but I carried on. Sleep became a luxury. Hunger remained my constant companion, but my determination grew stronger with every passing day. My friends, if I could call them, that mocked me. Why waste your time reading? They laughed. People like us are born poor and die poor. Accept it. Their words cut deep, but I used that pain as fuel. I didn't want to prove them wrong, wanted to prove myself right. Then came the real test. My mother fell ill. The little savings I had began to vanish with doctor visits and medicines. I remember sitting outside the hospital one night, tears burning my eyes. All my sacrifices seemed pointless. Poverty had found another way to crush me. For a moment, I thought about giving up. I thought maybe my friends were right that people like me weren't meant to rise. But then I remembered my father's calloused hands, the way he had carried burdens heavier than himself just to keep us alive. I remembered the stranger S words. What keeps you poor is not the lack of money, the lack of belief. That was enough to keep me moving forward. So I doubled my efforts. I worked harder, saved more, and continued learning. Slowly, small opportunities began to appear. A shopkeeper, impressed by my ability to count quickly, let me help with accounts. Another man, noticing my willingness to learn English, hired me part-time to help with basic paperwork. Each new skill I gained opened another door. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it was progress. And progress, no matter how small, was the proof that sacrifice pays off. Looking back, those years were the hardest of my life. They broke me down, rebuilt me, and tested every ounce of strength I had. But they also shaped me into someone who refused to surrender. Because the truth is, success isn't built in moments of comfort. It's built in the trenches of struggle, on the road of sacrifice, step by painful step. And though I didn't know it yet, all that pain was leading me toward a transformation far greater than I had ever imagined. From rags to respect, my life transformed. If there's one truth I've learned, it's this: the road of sacrifice always leads somewhere. For years, I lived in darkness, poverty, hunger, humiliation. But I never stopped believing, never stopped fighting, never stopped working. And then, slowly, the cracks in my old life began to open, letting the light in. It started small. My ability to keep accounts accurately impressed one of the shopkeepers where I worked. He recommended me to his cousin, who owned a small wholesale business. At first, I was just helping with records, but soon I was learning how sales worked, how profit was made, how trust could build relationships. I asked questions constantly. I listened more than I spoke. I learned not just about business, but about people. Within a year, I was no longer just a laborer. I was an assistant. I earned a little more money, enough to bring home proper meals for my mother and sister. Seeing them eat without worry for the first time in years filled my heart with a joy I can't describe. My mother's eyes no longer carried only sadness. They carried pride. That was the fuel I needed to keep climbing. But I didn't stop there. Kept reading, kept studying, kept learning. English, business strategies, even communication skills. I used every free moment to sharpen my mind. I saved every coin I could, until finally, I had enough to try something I never thought possible, starting something of my own. It wasn't big, just a tiny stall where I sold basic items, tea, biscuits, small goods, but it was mine. Every rupee I invested came from years of sweat and sacrifice. I poured my soul into that stall, treating every customer with respect, working harder than ever before. Slowly, people began to notice. They returned not just because of what I sold, but because of how I treated them with honesty, humility, and gratitude. One day, as I was serving a customer, I noticed a familiar face. It was him, the stranger who had once given me that old, tattered book. I rushed to greet him, and when I told him about my journey, his eyes glistened. "I knew you would do it," he said softly, "because you never stopped believing." That moment, it felt like life had come full circle. Years passed, and my little stall grew. I expanded into a shop, then into multiple shops. I hired people, many of them boys who were once like me, poor, hopeless, ignored by society. I told them the same thing the stranger once told me. Poverty is not your destiny unless you accept it. I wasn't rich overnight. Success was slow, built brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. But eventually I earned enough to give my mother the life she deserved. She no longer had to sew clothes late into the night. She rested, she smiled, and she finally saw the fruit of all her sacrifices. The boy who once stood outside bakeries with an empty stomach now owned his own business. The child who once felt invisible now had respect, dignity, and a voice. And yet, the greatest transformation wasn't the money, the shops, or the success. The greatest transformation was within me. I went from a boy who believed life was cruel and hopeless to a man who believed no obstacle was too great. When I look back now, I don't see poverty as a curse. It taught me resilience, discipline, humility, and gratitude. Without those lessons, I would never have become the man I am today. So when people ask me about my life, I tell them this: I was born poor, but I refused to die poor. Poverty shaped me, but it did not define me. My life is proof that no matter how broken your beginning is, your ending can be beautiful if you refuse to give up. This was my journey. From rags to respect, from shadows to light, from a poor boy with nothing, to a man who found everything that truly mattered.